My vision presents a win-win opportunity for both sides, a realistic two-state solution that resolves the risk of Palestinian statehood to Israel's security. Today, Israel has taken a giant step toward peace.
Hello and welcome to Newswire. I'm Ayza Omar. You were just listening to US President Donald Trump standing next to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announcing what he's been calling the deal of the century. After many years of discussions, lots of delays, President Trump has finally unveiled this much-awaited Middle East plan, which, of course, he's been calling the deal of the century. And that is exactly what we'll be looking into today. The main points we will be discussing, but according to this proposal, very quickly going through them, the US has essentially come out and recognized Israel's sovereignty over all the illegally occupied territories. Now, the plan includes also a map, which we will be showing you in a few seconds, where details have been given illustrating the territorial sort of compromises that Israel is willing to make. Calling them compromises in itself is a big question we're looking to address today. Now, according to this map, Palestinian territory will be more than twice the size as it initially was. And we're also seeing that the Palestinian capital will be in eastern Jerusalem, where Mr. Trump says the US would also open an embassy. Now, the PLO said that Mr. Trump's plan would give Palestinians control over what, 15% approximately of what it's called historic Palestine, but that in itself is a big debate. The deal of the century says that Jerusalem will also remain Israel's undivided capital. So a lot is going on here between the lines that we're looking to address. Now, there are a lot more points that we'll be discussing, but first, without further ado, let me introduce Dr. Basem Naim, spokesperson for Hamas, joining us from Gaza. Dr. Basem Naim, to get your opinion on the deal of the century. Now, of course, right off the bat, this was being rejected by the Palestinian leaders right from the beginning. In fact, there was a lot of resistance. But now that it's out and we have the details on it, what's your reaction?
Thank you very much. First of all, we Palestinians, we don't see it as a century deal or a deal of the century. We look at it as a shame of the century. I was yesterday watching TV and listening to Mr. Trump and Netanyahu in the press conference. I was trying to find something coping with what he said win-win plan or win-win deal. What can the Palestinian win from such a catastrophe? This deal, it means a new catastrophe for the Palestinians, a new Nakba. We are talking about displacing or kicking Palestinians from their capital, Jerusalem. We are talking about canceling fully the right of Palestinians to return to their homelands or to their houses, kicked forcefully by the Zionist gangs in 1948. We are talking about losing the majority of our occupied territories, which is representing the minimum of our rights in our historical Palestine, which is guaranteed by the international law.
Right. Now, there's also a question. There are some details that I'd like to mention here, something that President Trump also said while announcing this proposal. He said Palestinians or Israelis will not be uprooted from their homes, suggesting that existing Jewish settlements in Israeli-occupied West Bank will remain. What are your thoughts on that?
The Palestinians are already kicked out of their homes. First, in 1948, from the historical Palestine, and they are now, based on this plan, are not allowed to return back, which is guaranteed by the international law. Second, the rest of Palestinians who are living in the West Bank, Jerusalem, and Gaza, and mainly in the West Bank and Jerusalem, they are forcefully, day by day, are kicked out of their houses gradually. We are talking about hundreds of houses demolished yearly, We are talking about thousands of families kicked out of their houses in Jerusalem, in the West Bank. Those settlers in 1940, in 1993, when Oslo Agreement was achieved, there was around 100,000 settlers in the West Bank. Today, we are talking about 750,000 settlers living in the West Bank, in Palestinian houses, in Palestinian territories, in Palestinian land. They are uprooting trees. They are demolishing houses. Therefore, it is a big lie to talk about what does it mean that what Trump said, that no one will be kicked out. It means that the settlers will not leave the land they have already forcefully occupied.
Mm-hmm. And Jared Kushner, senior White House advisor, and also President Trump's son-in-law, one of the key people behind this Middle East plan, he's come out and said in a number of TV interviews that this was a last chance for Palestinians to have a state and to find peace and prosperity. What do you make of his comments?
First of all, neither Trump nor his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who has no idea about the area or about can decide about last chance or first chance. We are here, Palestinian. We are staying here, and we will not leave our land. And second, what does it mean, last chance? Many American administration before, they have said this is the best chance, this is the last chance, and Palestinians resisted to compromise the minimum of their rights in their homeland, which is again a state in 67 border with Jerusalem as a capital, and preserving the right of return for 6 or 7 million Palestinians displaced from their homes. Therefore, he has no authority, and he has to decide for other people about first or last chance. Yesterday, we have seen they are talking about a deal, but what we have seen, it is a deal between the Americans and the Israelis. One man is now under impeachment process. Right. And he is trying to rescue himself, and the other one, he is threatened to be taken to jail. This is a deal to rescue both politicians.
So you're suggesting it comes at a critical time, because those who are involved in this deal, you're talking about Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he's facing indictment. We are talking about President Trump here. He is running also in his election year while being impeached. It's a critical time for them. They would be definitely looking for distractions. But at the same time, the kind of reactions we're seeing from the world, Turkey and Iran are the only two countries who have come out and pretty much said it as it is, saying that this proposal is stillborn, it's doomed to fail. But what about the rest of the Arab countries? How do you make of their reaction?
Really, we are very sad that we see some Arabic countries directly or indirectly accepted this shame of the century, this catastrophic plan. Some of them were present in the press conference, shamefully, and others, they have issued press releases, and they were indirectly accepting this as a baseline for negotiation.
What is, Dr. Basem Naim, it is, you're saying it's very disappointing, but Dr. Basem Naim, what is now the strategy that Hamas has in mind? Because one of the points in this proposal specifically said, I just want to read that out, Gaza is held hostage by Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad.
Look, the problem of the Americans, or in particular Trump and his administration, is not with Hamas or Jihad. The problem is with the Palestinian people as a whole. Yesterday, we have seen all Palestinians, all factions in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, and everywhere united behind one position: rejection of this deal by all means available. Second, Hamas and Jihad and other groups, when they are resisting the occupation, this is a right guaranteed by the international law for any occupied people to resist the occupation. The problem is not in Hamas or Jihad. The problem is in the presence of the occupation. Therefore, if they have to solve something, they have to do to have a plan to end this occupation. By the way, yesterday, we didn't hear any word about occupation, about occupying territories. They are talking about Palestinians as individuals living in a place, how to make them rich, how to end poverty, how to have a flourishing economy. They are talking about not about the political rights, about the people who have political rights.
Okay. Dr. Basem Naim joining us from Gaza. Thank you so much. Here, let me introduce Dr. George Szamuely, an IR expert, an author, journalist, and senior research fellow at the Global Policy Institute. Welcome, Dr. George Szamuely. You're speaking to us today from Budapest. Your thoughts on this so-called deal of the century, considering this deal, as they're calling it, President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu, is missing one key component throughout these past few years as it was coming together, and that was the representation of the Palestinians.
Yes, well, the deal is pretty much as we had expected that it would be. And it was inevitable given that the formulation of this plan was left in the hands of Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. Kushner, as you know, is a lifelong friend of Netanyahu. I mean, so much so that Netanyahu used to family house whenever Netanyahu visited the United States. So naturally, this is a plan that was conceived of and drafted by Netanyahu. And that's what you get. And it was obvious, really, from everything that the Trump administration had done, almost from the moment that it took office, that this is where we would end up. Everything for Israel, nothing at all for the Palestinians. And so therefore, this was, this is the end result. The unfortunate part of it is that this will essentially become a fait accompli. No, the rest of the world isn't going to accept this. But it will become a fait accompli in that no future American president will dare to reverse these unilateral steps that Israel will undoubtedly make in the very near future. Mm-hmm. And so it'll just be there. I mean, and the Americans will just accept it. I mean, there'll be a few American politicians who might, cough and say, we're not happy about this, not happy about that. But no one will dare, no one in the United States will risk his political career in trying to reverse this.
So they've set a very dangerous precedent here. They're really dangerous precedent here. But Dr. Szamuely, your thoughts on how far they've come in not just the U.S. foreign policy taking such a huge U-turn on how they saw this Israel-Palestinian conflict, but also compare it to how the UNSC resolutions 242 and 338, and then the Oslo Accords, how would you compare this with them?
Yeah, absolutely. Because the United States has adhered, at least in public, it is stated that we support resolutions 242 and 338. These are occupied territories. The Israeli settlements are illegal, and that any future settlement between Israel and the Palestinians has to involve a state for the Palestinians and has to involve the dismantlement of the settlements. The settlements are illegal under international law. I mean, and that has been the U.S. position since 1967 and since 1973. And, Trump has thrown it all out of the window. Now, Trump didn't come out of the blue, and the United States has been thoroughly hypocritical about this because the United States has known for years, for decades, that Israel was violating these resolutions, that Israel was violating international law by continuing to build settlements, right, and has done nothing about it. The United States has always, Israel is a huge recipient of U.S. aid. And Absolutely. Not once has the United States conditioned aid to Israel on the dismantlement of settlements, or a refusal right. to build any more settlements. So
hold that thought, Dr. Szamuely. Dr. Szamuely, that thought. Let me introduce here another guest to get his thoughts on this very point. Also, we have with us Mr. Gideon Levy. He's a journalist joining us from Tel Aviv. Mr. Levy, thank you for joining us here. We were just speaking to Dr. Szamuely, a point he was highlighting here, President Trump's sort of bias towards Israel, not in terms of aid also, but the kind of political favors, the recognition of Israeli settlements. This plan now, this proposal, the Middle East proposal here, I mean, your thoughts on, is this essentially President Trump, the U.S. foreign policy on Israel and Palestine, coming out basically officially now throwing out the UNSC resolutions, the Oslo Accords, or any kind of recognition that Israel had illegally occupied, settled down, and taken over Palestinian land? Is that out the window now?
Yeah, unfortunately, this plan is about smashing the Palestinian people, smashing the remains of their hope for any kind of justice. But in the same time, it is also about smashing the international law, smashing the resolutions of almost all the international institutions, and just declaring the strong one as the only one around.
So, Mr. Levy, then how do you expect this to move forward? I mean, what is the weightage even at a point where both these individuals, President Trump, he's impeached, and now he is running for for presidential elections. We see Prime Minister Netanyahu, he's embroiled in his own corruption case, and an unprecedented third time, there are going to be the snap general elections in a year's time in Israel. What is the weightage of this proposal then?
We can only cross our fingers and hope that Donald Trump will not be re-elected, because if he will be re-elected, this plan might be implemented in a one-sided way. It doesn't matter, by the way, who will be elected in Israel, because both main parties declare that they support this plan, so there is no difference here. The only hope is that Donald Trump will not be re-elected, which rather right now doesn't seem very probable that he will not be re-elected. He seems to be gaining power in the United States.
But so, Dr. Szamuely, how do you see this moving forward? Even if they are, I mean, irrespective of the kind of result that would come out from the presidential elections in the US and in Israel also, but considering that this is straight out violation of international law, UNSC resolutions. I mean, the kind of reactions we are getting from countries, UK has reacted very warmly, Turkey and Iran have condemned it. I mean, the Palestinian leadership, no doubts about how they've been against this from the beginning, even before it was announced. I mean, what is the validity then? I mean, what kind of precedent does it set? It's not the first time a peace deal has been proposed and it had absolutely no effect.
I think that there's not a whole lot that the rest of the world can do about it. Because as I said earlier, even if President Trump isn't re-elected and he's replaced by a Democrat, no Democrat will risk his political future by reversing any of Israel's annexations. It's just too much. I mean, if you remember the Obama administration waited until the very end, within the very last days, at the point at which Obama wouldn't pay any political price at all for abstaining on at the United Nations Security Council on the issue of the building of the settlement. Right at the very end. In other words, Obama wouldn't pay any political price in abstaining. Even so, there was a huge uproar in the United States that the Obama administration was betraying a great ally in the Middle East. So unfortunately, I don't think we can rely on the Democrats to reverse any of this. And as far as the Arab world is concerned, well, the rejectionists, the so-called rejectionist states, Syria, Iraq, Libya, Iran, all of them are now embroiled in political problems of their own. And so they're not really in any position to do very much about the Palestinians. Mm-hmm. So it's hard to see how anything can be done to help them. Russia offers diplomatic support, but there's not a great deal that Russia can do because, you can raise the matter at the UN Security Council, but the United States has a veto there. So that will be that. I mean, whatever happens at the UN Security Council, America will veto it. So, right. Unfortunately, it's hard to see any real hope for the Palestinians.
So it sounds like then, Mr. Levy, this proposal of the Middle East plan is like Iran and Turkey have said, dead in the water. I mean, it's dead on arrival. There's nothing much of a difference in the Israel-Palestinian conflict.
No, we shouldn't give up. I mean, there are still civil societies in the world who might wake up to a reality of an apartheid state in the Middle East and might take the same measures they took against the first apartheid state, namely South Africa. It was about civil societies and some governments who really took some measures which brought the end of the apartheid system in South Africa. let's hope that something will happen and public opinion in the West, maybe in some European countries, will apparently wake up and will say no to another apartheid state, because we are now confronting a declaration of another apartheid state, nothing less but this. And the question is, for the international community, are you ready to accept another apartheid state? That's the whole issue.
The problem with that is then, I mean, I see it, and is that for 45 years this has been going on, and the world community has not stepped up, not once. And if there was anybody to take this debate forward, to come down with the resolution, to get both parties, to get the Palestinians to speak to the Israelis and vice versa, it was the US, even though their bias in President Trump's tenure has become very, very obvious and official. So, Mr. Levy, especially when the proposal itself says things like that delivery of, that, for example, the state of Israel and the US don't believe in returning to the 67 borders, and they call it a fair compromise, it becomes a very sort of a, what do you call it, not a very optimistic future ahead for both of them.
Don't look for optimism from me, because for a long time I am not very optimistic. On the other hand, we cannot just raise our hands and surrender and say there's nothing that we can do. The struggle should go on. And yes, right now, everything looks with very, very little hope, if at all. But, you know, many things in history happened in a most unexpected way, and huge superpowers collapsed in the most unexpected timings. I don't know. Right now, I cannot draw a scenario in which the Israeli occupation comes to its end, Palestinians are getting their rights. I cannot draw such a scenario. But this does not mean that we are going to give up or are going to just accept it, that, yeah, there is another apartheid state in the world and we love it and it will continue to be the darling of the West.
But so, Dr. Szamuely, your thoughts. Let me read out a few more points from the deal that I thought specifically, like particularly stood out. The Israelis are expected to implement their side of the obligation only if the Palestinian Authority or any other body acceptable to the Israelis have full control of Gaza. And they've before that also mentioned that Gaza is at the moment held hostage by Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad.
Yes, that's right. It's completely one-sided in that it's always the Palestinians who have to jump through hoops, always the Palestinians who have to show themselves to be worthy negotiating partners. Israel never has to prove anything. And so, for instance, there is a 4-year settlement freeze. Now, we've seen these settlement freezes in the past, and Israel has not stuck by these settlement freezes. But at any moment, Israel can say, well, the Palestinians are violating their obligations, so we're going to end the settlement freeze. And so even before the 4 years are up, Israel can at any time relaunch these new settlements. And of course, after the 4 years, well, the freeze is over, and again, we can have the more settlements. Mm-hmm. So the inexorable annexations of what even this land that Trump has so generously bestowed on the Palestinians, even that land will gradually be gobbled up by Israel during this period and after the 4 years. So yes, I mean, it's completely one-sided. Mr. Levy is right in that, yes, there is public opinion, and there is public opinion in Europe in particular that will object to an apartheid state, and public opinion even in the United States that objects to that. Unfortunately, you know, Europe has enough problems of its own in its dealings with the United States, and the Middle East may not be number one on its agenda. I mean, it's there are other things that are more urgent that the Europeans may want to address if they confront the United States. So that's another.
Okay, Dr. George Szamuely there. Thank you so much, and Mr. Gideon Levy for joining us in this conversation. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. The Palestinian leadership has rejected this proposal. In fact, they've said 1,000 times no, and even before the release, they did. Meanwhile, Jared Kushner, the senior White House advisor, has gone and said that this is the last chance for the Palestinians to have a state. And that conversation comes to an end for now. We'll take a quick short break. When we're back, we'll be taking a look a little east, checking out what is happening in India. Welcome back to Newswire. I'm Ayza Omar. India's Supreme Court on Tuesday granted bail to 14 convicts who were sentenced to life imprisonment in a case that involved a massacre of 33 Muslims during 2002 Gujarat riots. These were communal riots in Western Indian state of Gujarat that took place in 2002. A trial court back in 2011 had convicted 18 of these individuals. One of them, however, died. The remaining 17 were then moved to Gujarat High Court, where they were given life sentences. 3, however, out of these 17 were acquitted. Now, these 14 had the chance to appeal against their conviction to the Supreme Court. But before their appeal could be heard, their bail applications, they came through, and now they are out in bail. This Gujarat communal riots, it was a horrible time for Muslims in India back then in 2002, as reportedly at least 1,000 Muslims were killed, thousands displaced across Gujarat in 2002 in these riots, which today even are called one of the worst incidents in India's history. Now, we're trying to take a look at this Supreme Court sentence, this bail, and reflect on the current situation also in India, how the timing could possibly be making sense, where CAA, the Citizenship Amendment Act, is creating havoc as Indian Muslims and, in fact, Indians from all religions, sects are coming out on the streets protesting the BJP-led government's policies. So let me introduce who we'll be speaking to. We have with us Mr. Ravi Srivastav, an analyst joining us from Mumbai. We also have Mr. Rajiv Desai, an analyst joining us from Delhi. And Mr. Shahid Malik, a former ambassador to India, joining us from Lahore. Welcome to all three of you. Mr. Malik, your thoughts on this latest development coming at a time where India is facing unprecedented protests against its government?
Yes, you're absolutely right. I think if we go back a little into history, and one should not forget the fact that it was Mr. Modi who was the chief minister of Gujarat at that time, during the horrific Godhra incident. And so the 14 convicts who have been acquitted after what happened against the Muslims in Sardarpur village, I think this is the shape of things to come. And to me, it is highly disappointing that the Gujarat High Court itself had given life imprisonment to them, and they have been acquitted by Chief Justice Bob Day and his bench. So I think this really is there is a pattern to it. What we have seen in the last few months, the sort of an organized manner in which the Muslims have been targeted. I think this is a cause for worry to all of us and to liberal-minded people within India. The uprising, the uproar in the civil society in India, you refer to the Citizenship Action, the bill, the CAB, and other measures that have been taken, the revocation of Article 370, which had given a special status to Indian-occupied Kashmir. All these things add up to what I just said, that there appears to be an organized sort of a move to ostracize the Muslims. And I think this latest decision by the Supreme Court, we may sort of say that the Supreme Court and its the judges in their wisdom had decided it. But if you look at an earlier decision regarding the Babri Masjid, again the Supreme Court, I think one expected the Supreme Court to sort of rule according to give a ruling according to the established practice and what has been presented in the court. But again, so I am not surprised really. I am disappointed, no doubt about it, but I am not surprised at this decision.
Mr. Ravi Srivastav, how do you see it? Do you agree with what Mr. Malik has said, that this seems like a pattern here, a shape of how things are going to be like in the future?
I agree with Mr. Malik to the extent that the same person, Mr. Modi was the chief minister then, and Mr. Amit Shah, both are now at the helm of the affairs in India. Mr. Modi is the prime minister, Mr. Amit Shah is the home minister. And all these 14 convicts, I would call it a strange order. I am suspecting, what kind of an order is this? Because they were convicted for life imprisonment. All had done around 7 years of their imprisonment. And suddenly the court decides that they should be granted a bail. And they shifted from the Gujarat, where they were undergoing their imprisonment, to a next state, Madhya Pradesh, and they'll be sent to Indore and Jabalpur, and they will be given some kind of an employment so that they can run their livelihood, they can feed their families or whatever it is. Apart from that, the two groups have been made. This one group is that which was convicted on the basis of single eyewitness, and the other group is the one which was sentenced on the two eyewitnesses. So this is something strange. The incident had happened in Ode near Anand, where 23 Muslims were massacred, and this is a black spot on India. Rightly you said that there is a protest going on across India at the moment, and there is a place called Shaheen Bagh in the capital of India in New Delhi, where the protests are happening, and tens of thousands of, I would not say only Muslims, there are people from all communities which are opposing the CAA, NPR and NRC at the moment, and the protests are going on.
Right.
And the elections are on in Delhi state at the moment. Our home minister makes a comment at another constituency called Babarpur, where he says that on the electronic voting machines, if people will press the button at Babarpur, and the current will be passed on to people at Shaheen Bagh. I mean, that kind of a communal statement are being made by him.
Right.
And they are the same people who were, propagators of Gujarat riots, where thousands of Muslims lost their lives and their properties were destroyed.
Absolutely. Mr. Desai, this Supreme Court decision to give bail to those 14 individuals convicted for life as being found guilty for the Gujarat riots, the massacre of those 33 Muslims who were burnt alive. I mean, the timing of it, do you think this would add fuel to the fire that is the protests against the BJP government's decision on the CAA and the NRC and the NPR? I mean, the protests which are for a secular India, which are to protect the Constitution, and the CAA is not seen as one, seen as violating the Constitution. Do you think it will add fuel to this fire?
I think let's not overstate the case here. In my assessment, the current government is completely rattled. For the first time, I've never seen anything like this all the years I've been in India. So many millions of people taking the street all across the country. So much chastisement from all over the world, including most recently the European Union. The Bangladesh minister refused to come, the Japan prime minister refused to come. There's all kinds. So these guys are completely besieged. They've done this and they don't know what to do. So what does a bully do when he is confronted and pushed with his back to the wall? He snarls some more. So now this, what they're now saying with the Supreme Court decision, that they're saying, look, we even control the Supreme Court. They had their army guys get up and say, we'll do a war with Pakistan. Now they've got the Supreme Court to do this. What they're signaling is, look, we control everything. So your protest is futile.
Right.
It's the typical response of a bully. When they're flustered and pushed to the corner, they react like with snarls, like a cornered animal. So
right.
I think it's that kind of thing that we should be aware of, rather than, of course, there's need to wring your hands and say, oh my God, but this, targeting Muslims has been their covert agenda, which has now become overt. The question is, are they succeeding? And the answer is no.
Right. So, Mr. Malik, I want this point to you also. The whole agenda of the BJP-led government, led by Prime Minister Modi here, to target the Muslims of India here. Is this agenda now coming across on the World Forum the way Pakistan has been talking about it since the abrogation of Article 370, especially since 5th August? Do you think that message is now being conveyed?
Yes, Ayza, the gentleman from across the border spoke very well and to the point, and I have great regard and respect for his views. At the same time, I would also like to say that I had two postings in India. One in 1996, in December, when the Babri Mosque was desecrated. And I think that was the day I was asked a question at that time by the Indian media, and I said, this is the myth of secularism in India has been exposed, because a country which cannot protect the religious rights and claims to be secular in nature, I think that was a sad day for secularism in India. And this goes back to a few decades. And now what we are seeing today again is that within India, for the time being, let's forget about the international community and Pakistan and others who feel very strongly that the Muslims are being targeted. But what about the thousands and thousands of people all over India, starting from Guwahati, which initially started from there, and now in Delhi and all over India, people have risen against this sort of move by the present government. And this is, mind you, this is a protest against the fact that the secular credentials of India are being eroded daily, hourly. And I think people of India deserve, those who have come out in protest against that, they deserve to be praised for all the valor and what they have shown.
And these protests are not only within India itself. Mr. Srivastav, York, there were a lot of Indian Americans that came out and protested. In fact, over a dozen different cities across the US in the past few days, there have been protests against Prime Minister Modi's policies. Will they have any effect, if at all, on the present government to maybe reconsider their moves?
I don't think so, Ayza. Prime Minister and the Home Minister are the very, very adamant kind of people, and they have been repeatedly saying on the public forums that the CAA will not be reconsidered and it will not be reviewed. It has been passed by both the houses of parliament. It is constitutional. It is now an act, and unless the protesters get some relief from the Honorable Supreme Court, which also I am apprehensive about that, because this order on these convicts is a strange one, because they were serving a life imprisonment for a heinous crime of massacre. And then you become, the Supreme Court turns out to be a reformist and says that, look, we are sending these people for their social work and a spiritual reform. Since when the courts became the reformers? I'm surprised to see that, because these people were serving a sentence. And will the Supreme Court in future take it as a the precedence, and they will be taking the similar kind of judgment for the other convicts also? So it is all very bizarre. What Mr. Desai has rightly said, that the government is trying to prove their supremacy by such kind of orders, that look, we can manage everything. We can manage parliament, we can manage judiciary, and we can manage media, so nobody can come and harm us. So this is what, very strange. Yeah.
Okay, very quickly, Mr. Desai, we've come to the program. I've got last 30 seconds left. But do you think that this would in any way set a precedent? The BJP-led government in any way is able to influence the kind of decisions that state institutions have been so far standing strong and being impartial?
Which state institutions? The judiciary is under their thumb. The army, the military is under their thumb. The bureaucracy is under their thumb. The media are under their thumb. So they're scared or they're bought off. I don't think it's a long-term issue, honestly. I think that these are scared people who have no idea, no experience in running things. And they thought that they could play around like this. And when people show up in their millions, ordinary human beings, to protest them, and when it spreads around the world, they're completely petrified. They don't know what to do. So their people are going out on campaign trails and threatening to shoot protesters. Some people are saying, protesters will be raped and hanged, and
Right.
I have no idea what's going on. These guys are completely gone.
They're petrified of their death. As you said there, Mr. Desai, unfortunately, we've run out of time. I just want to thank you here, Mr. Srivastav, Mr. Desai, and Mr. Malik, for giving us your analysis on this. We have come to the end of the program talking about India and the kind of protests taking place around the world against the BJP-led government's policies on the CAA being seen as anti-secular, anti-constitutional. And with that, we've come to the end of the program. We'll see you next time. Goodbye.